Hi, Vincent Hall, and welcome to another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. This week, as promised, we're going to explore color theory a little bit further. Last week, we talked about doing the complementary colors and actually going to split complementary, which was a little challenging, but it's fun to learn about how colors can affect the way we view a piece of work. Today, we're going to look into the psychology of color. Now, psychology and color might sound like the two don't really connect, but they do in a lot of ways. We, as human beings, assign emotions to colors, and they've been studied by many psychologists throughout the centuries, and artists now use that to their advantage to kind of control the way you view their work. The interesting thing, though, is we all have our own idea of about how a color can affect us. So it's a very personal experience and journey. What I'm going to show you are what the general recommendations are for how to use color in color theory as a psychological tool. And then you can make your own decisions on what colors work best for you, for what mood you would like to convey. But we're also going to add a drawing element to this. And we've been doing a lot of landscapes with mostly just flora and fauna, and some flowers and some still lifes, but I'm gonna also show you the simple way to draw a building. In this case, we're going to do a barn, a simple A-frame structure barn. It could also be a simple house or whatever you might want to try to draw. And we're gonna learn a little bit about perspective, a horizon line, and a vanishing point. Let's get started. Once you have established what you want to draw for your basic building, you have to decide on the vanishing point. If you're following along with my picture, which I'll have copies of down in the Art Center, we're going to have a very low horizon line. This is pretty far down on the bottom of my paper. So I'm just drawing a line pretty far down. Doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line, close enough, because this is actually a hill, as I'll show you when we go back to the picture. And then I'm just going to plot where I want the top of my roof to be, which is about right there. From here, we can use a ruler, or you can do this freehand if you want. I'll do this with the ruler on this side just to get the pitch. And if I line up the edge of my ruler with that line, I will get the same degree of roof pitch on the other side, so I don't have to eyeball it too much. From here, I'm looking at my picture and I see that there's a vanishing point. The problem with vanishing points, which are usually dots that we draw on the paper to show where the sky and the land meet, is that sometimes the vanishing point is way out here, further than your paper. So we're going to just eyeball this and know that our vanishing point, if you're following my ruler, is way down here where my ruler ends rather than the edge of my paper, because that would just be way too severe of a roof pitch. And I'm just going to draw this line in on the side, and then slide my ruler back and draw the other edge here of my roof. And then I'm just going to connect these two. And then one is going to be further than the other. And again, you can eyeball this if you want, but we're just basically drawing the idea of a roof. And I will use my eraser to get rid of that line. So as long as you have something similar to what the picture looks like, which I'll reference back in a minute, we're good to go. Then we're just going to draw a straight line. You can line it up with the edge of your paper and slide it over. For this part of the barn, slide it straight over. You can always check to make sure it's lined up over here, pretty straight, that side. And the last piece is going to be here. And again, if you line it up with the edge of your paper and slide, you should have the edge of your barn. So if we did nothing else to this, it should look pretty much like the beginning of a house or a barn. But there's always more. Now, I've noticed on my barn that there's some double lines where the roof actually extends out from the building a little bit. So I'm going to be adding a second line in and then just connecting some of the sides of the roof. It's really pretty simple. The picture that I selected also has some trees in the background, but you're free to add whatever you'd like. If you want to put animals in front of the barn, that's fine too. Some people might want to pretty much ignore the building structure and maybe go for more just the idea of animals that live inside a barn. And you can Google reference so many pictures of barns. Now, what I've noticed from the barn that I'm drawing is there's a double edge on the roof, and we're going to be drawing that in so that you can see the overhang a little bit. This perspective stuff doesn't have to be scary, and you're welcome to freehand this in how you see it. A lot of painters do not draw before they paint. They just start with the brush and go for it. And some people do like to plan things out with a drawing. So whatever works best for you is totally fine. The barn that I picked, by the way, happens to be what they call a German barn. And I'm of German Pennsylvania ancestry, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to do that. And this is a barn similar to what they had built in the late 1700s, mid 1700s actually, when a lot of German immigrants came over to that part of the United States. So I'll show you how to do that double overhang, and then we're going to talk about color theory, the psychology of color. So here we are with the barn that I just finished drawing, and all I'm talking about is this little line here that shows the barn roof going behind. And then this second line here, that's going to become our overhang. So I'm just drawing a little secondary line in. I'm going to connect these out. And now I have the overhang of the roof. There's another one here. I'm going to freehand this one just to show you how I would do that. I just kind of move my pencil down and just rough in the line. Now my barn also has another overhang here that I'm not going to add, but you could do that if you wanted to. However, for all practical purposes, we're pretty finished with the barn drawing. On to psychology of color. We're going to go through the basic colors, and there's some really interesting quotes by artists at the bottom that I'll read through, not to bore you with my reading capability, but to give you the idea of how different artists see the use of color differently. We're going to start with white, which really is a color. It is the reflection of all colors, but it is used in artwork, usually in combination with other colors. Here we see The Temptation of Christ from 1854 and a Pablo Picasso that you're probably familiar with, Guernica, from 1937. This one in white, psychologists have deemed that most people see white as clarity, used to generate peaceful feelings that project peace and purity, but can also be used to generate grief. So most colors have a yin and a yang, and it says here when highlighting something dark, white can also be used to represent death and mourning. So it really depends on how you're looking at things. I like that Henri Matisse said, color helps to express light, not the physical phenomenon, but only the light that really exists, that in the artist's brain. That's very interesting because it does go along with the idea that everyone has their own view of what's going on. So black, also considered a color, albeit neutral, like white, can show power, used to represent an element of dominance and authority or mystery, to conjure the unknown, or subject matter that is somber and dark. Vincent van Gogh said, suffice it to say that black and white are also colors, for their simultaneous contrast is as striking as that of green and red, for instance. So in a way, Van Gogh is saying black and white are their own complementary colors. Moving on over here to yellow. Yellow can symbolize cheer, associated with feelings of delight and warmth, much like the sun. And you can see a lot of these are monochromatic paintings like we did 2 weeks ago. But yellow can also be overstimulation. An abundance of yellow can create a sense of abrasiveness and unpleasantness. Then William Gass said, of all the colors, blue and green have the greatest emotional range. Sad reds and melancholy yellows are difficult to turn up. I happen to disagree, and many of us will. Some will agree with him, but the idea is he sees red and yellow as melancholy, whereas other people may see red and yellow as actually happy. Here we have orange and red, two other warm colors in our color wheel. Orange, the psychology of color, is vibrancy that has the ability to evoke vitality and enthusiasm. It can also be demonstrated as extravagance, using orange to command the attention of viewers. Orange sort of forces you to see what's there. And we have Case, Edgar Case, who wrote, "Orange is the color of the sun. It is vital and a good color generally, indicating thoughtfulness and consideration for others." That's interesting. A lot of people might not see orange as that. Then there's red. Red, as we know, can yield aggression, build a composition that fuels intense, fiery passion using bright reds. And of course, Edvard Munch in The Scream did a lot of reds and oranges to counter this blue here to evoke a sense of anger and rage and all of those things that The Scream is associated with. But red can also be affection, used to represent love and emotion, especially when paired with complementary colors, which would be green. Ah, yes, Valentine's Day, red roses, red hearts. We all know that that can truly symbolize affection. And I really like Kay Wallingstick's simple quote at the bottom: "When in doubt, make a red painting." Good idea. Purple and green. We're getting into the cool colors now. I know a lot of artists down in the Art Center that really enjoy using purple. And Susan Berkey, I'm talking to you, especially. If you've seen Susan's lavender paintings, they're absolutely stunning, as well as her birch trees. There's always some colors of purple in her work. And I believe in her interview, she said it's her favorite color. Anyway, purple, it says, can simulate creativity, use rich dark values to create feelings of luxury, imaginative thoughts, and vibrancy. So we think of royalty with colors, purple as well. Relaxation, it can call upon soft lavender hues for a more casual, restful vibe. And then Regina Brett's quote, "Be eccentric now. Don't wait for old age to wear purple." Well, I'm already in that genre of being older, and I enjoy wearing purple too. It's a great color, and it's also fun to paint. If you look at this monochromatic painting of Leaves by Georgia O'Keeffe, they're all in beautiful tones of lavender and purples. And knowing that Georgia O'Keeffe had her summer home in New Mexico, where there's a lot of lavender fields, it makes sense that she would use those colors as her palette for many of her still lifes and landscapes. Green. We all know green shows serenity. Drawing from nature inspiration, use green to relieve stress and evoke tranquility. But green also shows prosperity, hence why so much money from many countries is colored green. Prosperity, use green to represent success and wealth, much like that of money. As you can see here, again, these are mostly monochromatic greens in this landscape by Cezanne. And then this one down here by Van Dyck is a green dress on this woman, and he uses neutrals to kind of frame that green and really give a sense that she's a very wealthy aristocrat, or an heiress to some fortune perhaps. Green is the prime color of the world, and that from which its loveliness arises. And that was De la Barca and his quote on green. And I agree, it's a beautiful color to mix in. Maybe Kermit says it's not easy being green, but there's a lot of beauty in a green painting. Blue has probably some of the most strong emotions of any of the colors on the color wheel, because it can either go completely one direction or the other. So here's what Tranquility with Monet's painting of the water lilies, a very famous painting, I'm sure many of you know it. And here's the palette he used to create it, almost a lavender blue, and then different soft tones of blue for Tranquility. But here, Pablo Picasso, and we looked at this one in our monochromatic painting, he uses the darker blue palettes and almost like a sickly teal green color here to create or evoke feelings of sadness and aloofness. And John Ruskin's quote, "Blue color is everlastingly appointed by the deity to be a source of delight." So truly Ruskin is in Claude Monet's corner of using blues to psychologically promote feelings of tranquility and peace in the viewer. Well, that's a lot to take in, all of that psychology of color. And again, you can always re-reference this on any Google search once you select the color you'd like to use. But how do you go about selecting what color you want to do or what mood you want to create? And then when you do decide on what color, how do you use that effectively? Well, before we start the coloring of the drawing of my barn, I've taken the opportunity to use some of our photography skills in Photoshop to show you just how dramatic your color choices can affect how something looks. Let's see. And this is basically, we're looking at a grayish brown barn. It looks a little more brown in Photoshop than gray, but it's still a neutral color. So I thought by doing a split preview, I can show you the difference by warming up one side and cooling down the other. So this is what our picture looks like without any selection of correction of color. And this is what it looks like with warmer tones. And the beauty is we can go through here and see just what would happen with cooler tones, adding some blues, adding some crazy amounts of blues. So you certainly, some of this goes overboard, but you can see how it changes the whole mood of the barn. So using Photoshop, not that we're doing a photo lesson, but it's one way to quickly see how changing the colors of even the sky in the barn can make a difference. But we're not going to go with that. We are going to go here, where I already finished one, to show you how that same barn can look in different colors. Here we change the barn to red, which is what a lot of people associate with barn colors. But I changed the grass colors to a greenish yellow. So now it takes on almost an autumnal look. Whereas here, it looks like a midsummer day just by using the psychology of color to keep the greens alive. Because remember, green growth, early spring, using the yellows, it kind of gives it a more subdued feeling, a calmer color. And also, even though I did not change the color of the red on the barn, because red is next to this yellowy color, it changes the vibrancy of that red. So it's exactly the same, but next to the green, its complement, it really does make a difference in how this barn is perceived. So your individual preference may be to go with a calmer color or a more vibrant one with the greens, if that's the color of your choice. But in any event, we're going to get back to drawing our barn and seeing how we can use the psychology of color to make our barn interesting to the viewer. So we have some simple lines drawn for our barn, and all I'm going to do is shade in where I see my shadows, just freehand using graphite pencils. So really you don't have to use a color pencil. For the bulk of this, you can just use plain old number 2 drawing pencil if that's all you have. And I am just coloring in the areas that I see the shadows, because that's going to make a difference later on. And remember, you can always go over your graphite with colored pencil. And then if I want this barn to have this kind of weathered look, I'm going to just sort of take a line here and just start drawing in some rough lines up, down. And here's a good practice to do some of that varied line weight that we talked about. Make some lighter, some darker. They don't have to all be perfect. This is supposed to look like weathered wood. Notice I'm going up on some, down on others. Some I'm connecting, some I'm not. But just make sure you're doing a varied line weight. If you make these all look the same, it's going to look more like maybe tiger stripes and less like a barn. So I'm going to pick this up here after I go over it. You can go back over it a bunch of times. I've always found drawing wood to be kind of therapeutic because you can do a lot of different things with the lines. And then the roof up here, it simply has more of a shadow on the top. So I just turned my page, so I have better control of my pencil, but you should still be able to see this. And the darker shadow underneath. And then if I do decide I want to add some of these trees, I'm just going to rough in a little area where I'm going to draw those in color later on. Remember, this is all grass, although I see that the barn has a little bit of shadow going along the edge. And then here, I'm completely turning my paper because everyone has the strongest point of their hand, and some of us are better at going horizontal and some vertical. It's just simply the mechanics of your wrist. So I'm going this way so I can get those little shadows roughed in. And then here I'll come back up vertically just to show you the difference. I mean, there really isn't much of one. But here we have our basic barn structure. Now the fun begins. What color do we make the barn? I decided to go a little unconventional and go with pink because pink happens to be my granddaughter's favorite color. And I thought it might be fun to just change the dynamics of the barn. So I am using a darker pink colored pencil and just roughly coloring this whole barn in with one color. And you can go pretty fast with this. It's like coloring book type stuff. Coloring it in. Interestingly, with pink, it was determined initially that pink was a very soothing color, believe it or not, and they painted a lot of jail cells with the color pink. This was back in the 20th century, I think mid-20th century. Well, they found out that there can be too much of a good thing, as we all know. Anyone who's eaten too much ice cream or what have you. Too much pink for a long period of time actually changed the prisoner's temperament from being subdued to being angry. And that was the end of the pink jailhouse experiment. And they went back to using pretty much institutional gray or what have you. Better to have a neutral color than to have one that excites and entices a riot. So I've roughed in my color, and we're going to do a lot of blending later on. Now I have to determine, with color psychology, do I want my sky to be blue or do I want my sky to be a sunset? And I've decided again to go against the grain of what I have and go more with a sunset. So I'm going to use oranges and yellows and reds. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm doing this more as all warm colors, even the grass. I'm going to turn my paper this way. And imagine my orange sunset just coming across the bottom. So the beauty of color theory is even if you're looking at a picture that might have a blue sky, you don't have to do that. You can come up with whatever mood you're trying to create, and a sunset is going to be a totally different mood than a midday. Then I'm going to add some yellows up here. Now sometimes there's still a little blue or purple at the tip of the sky, but you have to be careful. If you use blue over yellow, you'll wind up with a green sky, and you can have a green sky, but that will evoke a whole nother thing, which includes a tornado, and we really don't want that. So I might just go with a very light blue just on the tip, but I'm not going to come down too far into my yellows. I'm just going to leave this go just to give it a little bit of an edge there. Then I'm going to go with the idea that it could be fall because I want to keep these red colors going. So where I have these trees blocked in, I'm going to just rough in some red and then go back over it maybe with some yellows. And when this gets all blended in, these are those Derwent Inktense pencils, by the way. So they will blend in and make a really pretty color. And then down here, to keep myself in the warm tones, I'm going to go with yellow instead of green so that the grass looks like it perhaps dried out, like we might see in the fall. And again, I'm laying in a base layer. I'm not worried about making grass texture. That will come, but we're not there yet. We're just trying to lay in some colors so I can use that water and blend it in. Now, if you're not using any kind of water-soluble color pencil, this is where you would start blending in. So where I had the pinks, but I want it darker, I might go back in with a red, since red is really in the color. It's one of the parents of pink, because red and white are what make a pink color, or maybe more magenta and white, but we're close enough. So if you're using just colors and not water to blend them, you don't have that in your arsenal of art supplies, that's fine. Or, you know, you could do this all in shades of gray, and that would give a whole nother approach to how your picture is viewed. Remember, black and white, the neutrals are also part of color psychology. So I'll just come down here where I had this graphite and just give it a little zhuzh of red so that I have some color in here when I add my water. There we go. Okay, let's see what we get with some water. I have my brush, I have my water, and my paper towel. So now we'll put this Inktense color to the test, and as promised, we're really getting some nice tones built up in here. Now, I'm going to bring my set of these colored pencils into the Art Center, so if you'd like to come down on Wednesday during the drawing class and experiment, you're welcome to do that. And hopefully we will get some ordered for the center in the near future, and I'm just gonna go rough here so I can add some grass tones later on. But you can see I'm being pretty sloppy, which wouldn't be normal if I was doing a portrait of someone, but what I'm trying to recreate here is old barnwood, and old barnwood is absolutely not perfect. And I'm keeping the roof the same color, but you know, you don't have to make this monochromatic. I've decided to do all warm colors for my picture. You certainly can do whatever you would like. You can use all the colors if you want in color theory and in psychology of color. It's just that each object that you make a particular color will take on a particular emotional meaning to the viewer, depending on what color you selected. So you absolutely don't have to stay in a monochromatic or in an analogous color family, which is where I am right now. But I'm just trying to wet all this down so we can let it dry and then go back and work into it with some of the details. And I'm just going across here. And you can see how I'm just brushing this sunset as I come up in the yellows. It's all blending together. But when this dries, oh, there's a little bit of that green coming in. I figured that would happen, but that's okay. We can just get a little bit. Sorry about that. I had to move my paper. Now I'm going this way so I can keep a horizontal line. When we think of sunsets and sky, we tend to think of them as being pretty fluid. So I could switch to a bigger brush here if I wanted to, but to keep this simple, and maybe you have one paintbrush lying around your apartment somewhere, that's really all you need. So I'm pretty much, this looks like I'm turning this into a watercolor, but I'm not. Remember, these paints, or pencils rather, dry like alcohol-based ink. So they're gonna be permanent, and I'm gonna be able to go back over them with my handy dandy regular colored pencils and turn this into a finished drawing that hopefully has a pretty nice mood, maybe a nice fall feel to it. But we're gonna let this dry and come back to it when it's done. I've selected an arsenal of my regular colored pencils, and since I promised I was doing a pink barn, I'm going to take a brighter pink now and start to color over some of these areas of the barn to just liven it up a little bit and give it more of that pink feel. So I'm going pretty fast because what I really want to do is then use white, we have our white color pencil, to go back in and add some of the highlights into the wood. So as you can see, as I'm pressing, hopefully you're starting to see that distressed look of old weathered barn look. So whether or not this barn was painted white or red or gray or just left to weather on its own or pink, it's going to have parts where the paint has faded off since it's an outdoor building. And most barns aren't necessarily painted every year all the time, especially this one, which from the looks of the way my drawing is going to resemble more of an abandoned barn, but that's okay too. I'm also going to use my white to just further lay in a little bit of highlight on this part of the roof, but not too much. Then, if we recall, green is the complement of red. So if I take a green colored pencil instead of black and go back in to get my shadows of red, it's actually going to, and pink, it's going to give me a deeper tone and also help neutralize out some of that pink without it looking too black and too harsh. Although again, if you're doing tones of black, you would just use a darker regular pencil. And I'm just going lightly over this area of the barn. I'm not trying to make this too perfect. Just some little squiggly lines here to give the idea of the wood in the barn. Now, one could argue this barn does not have any windows or any way to get in or out, and you would be right, because I think this might have been the back end of the barn. But if you wanted to draw in a door or a window, you could certainly do that. We would just simply follow the same angle of the lines here. I'll draw one in for you. And now we have where our window would be, and you're thinking, well, that's all wonderful, but that window wouldn't be boarded up. Well, it could be, but we can just go in with a darker color. In this case, I'm using a dark brown, and just kind of give the illusion of a little bit of a hole here kind of leading into nothing. Now, if this is a sunset, we know that this would be pretty dark in here, and we can use a regular black colored pencil then as well to just further deepen this little window that we threw in here, almost as an afterthought, but that way at least it doesn't look too lonely. Now, the beauty of the psychology of color is, what if there was a light on in the barn and we had pre-planned this window so that we could put yellow in here? Because it's a little hard to put a light color over a dark color if you're using color. But a warm yellow light would give the psychology of warmth and home and hearth. So even if you're just drawing a simple little house, maybe adding a window with a light on would be something fun that could also change the whole dynamic of the picture. On to these trees. So if I wanted these trees to simulate like a bright forest of, I don't know, maybe they're aspens or something that gets really brilliant in oranges and yellows, I'm going in with those colors. But you would be right if you're saying, I don't see any detail between these trees. Well, we're going back in again with our dark green and just drawing in a few little squiggly lines. And these squiggly lines are fun because they can represent trees without going crazy. And it's just going to give a nice change from all of the straight lines that we have with our barn, and just give the look of maybe something growing in the background. Again, those weren't the important part. This barn and my sunset were. To get into the idea of grasses, any kind of darker yellow pencil, don't sharpen them too much or you get that. And I'm just drawing in some grass lines. So I just want to keep drawing these in. I'm going to go up into the barn, even though they'll blend away. It'll give the illusion that they're going into the barn, and along my horizon line too. You could erase that horizon line out if you want to. I'm just going to make it a little bit darker, and that should give the idea of some of the grasses growing in the field. These are just short little strokes, so you can see stroke, 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 and you just build up multiple layers. You can use many colors. I want to keep this in a yellow feel, but I can also use a few darker browns to give some depth. The closer you get to the bottom of your page, the longer your grass strokes, if you're doing grass, would be, because they're closer to you. And anything that's closer to you when we're doing perspective should be bigger. So you can see down here, I'm making some of the grass lines bigger. I'm trying to keep them relatively light. I can even unify this by adding some oranges into the grass. The key is to think about, if I have a sunset, the sun is going to change the color dynamic of everything around it to that golden hour that we talked about, where everything has rich colors, and they don't all have to go the same direction. So you can change your grass strokes, not going crazy. We're not cross-hatching, but some of them can go in a little bit of a different direction. And then if you want to go back in again with the yellow, you know, you can keep doing that and fill it in. But the idea is I'm just doing these choppy little strokes so that I can start to get some grass. Now that might be all well and good, but there's no shadows, there's no depth. How do we get a shadow? We go to a darker brown or a purplish color, believe it or not. Yellow and purple are complements. So if I have a yellowish grass and I want to show that maybe the barn over here is casting a bit of a shadow, I'm just going to go on this side and make my grasses have a little bit of a purpley tone, which will just, after time of passing over, will give the illusion of a bit of a shadow over here. And I'm just going to blend it in a little bit on this side, maybe come over here a little bit. Make some shorter ones just to fill in wherever you see things that you think you might want to add, just to give it. I'm going to leave the sky alone because the sky is a smoother background and I want to keep it that way. And then just to finish off this barn a little bit and to give it some really interesting edging, I'm just going to take a darker red. This is called Tuscan red. It's a brownish red. And just kind of build in a little more shadows under this side of the barn because I'm getting the sense the light's coming from over here. So you can use whatever colors you want. This is still going to read a pinkish red barn. I'm just adding a little bit of highlight to it, maybe give some texture to the roof where it doesn't have any. The roof is probably made of either metal or wood as well, or shingles, so we'll just add a few little lines. And then use that same color here and there in the grass, because what we're doing now is unifying your picture by using the same color in the foreground that you have in the middle ground and the background, and even using a little bit of this brown mixed in with my trees. Okay, there you have it. Pretty much our finished barn. The idea is we were learning basic one-point perspective and also psychological use of color. I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think about these colors. The beauty of psychology in color in art is that you get to be in the driver's seat and decide how the viewer is going to see your work. Or at least you hope that's how they're going to see it. Because again, one person's interpretation of a color might be totally different from another. But regardless, it's going to give the viewer something to think about, and that's what we're looking for in our art. So in this episode of today, we did this barn scene. Very simple, but we got a basic sense of perspective and drawing a barn. So if you recall, we just drew a plot point, made basically a wide letter A, that's why they're called A-frame buildings, connected the lines, and then just drew an angle back to a vanishing point far, far off my page that gave us this sense of a barn going in one-point perspective. Now, two-point perspective would be a whole nother drawing lesson, and we really weren't worrying about drawing buildings today as much as the psychology of color. So maybe you don't want to try this project with color in drawing a building, although I thought it would be fun to switch ourselves out of flowers and landscapes with just trees and things and animals. But you could do an animal. What if you had a barn owl? You use the idea of the barn, but put a barn owl in there. Now, barn owls are normally a brownish color, maybe some white. But who's to say you can't have a yellow barn owl or a green one or whatever it is you might decide to do? The beauty of this lesson is experiment with color. Most of us do it every day when we select what we're going to wear, so why not try it in a drawing or a painting? In any event, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. If you want to try out those new pencils, the Inktense ones that I'm talking about, come down to the Art Center Wednesday at noon when the drawing class is there and give it a try. If not, wait till next week and we'll have another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create, and I will see you then. Take care and stay safe, Vincent Hall. We'll see you soon.